Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of GW Center for International Business Education and Research, I'd like to welcome the Honorable Genevie Brown Metzger, who is the Consul General from the country of Jamaica. She's going to speak to us today about mobilizing the Jamaican Diaspora Movement for economic development. She was appointed the Consul General for Jamaica in New York in 2008. Prior, she was a public relations and marketing consultant working in that industry for 28 years. She established the Genevie Brown Associates in 1984 and was focused there on emerging markets. That company merged with Reuter Finn in 1990, where she established the Emerging Markets and Caribbean Business Division. She's lived in the United States over 40 years and is doing some, as you'll hear today, some pioneering work in bridging the Jamaican Diaspora movement with the Jamaican government. This spring, she was the keynote speaker at a conference that GW's Diaspora Research Program co-hosted with Uppsala University there. As many of you know, Sweden is getting ready to take over the EU presidency, and so we put in our audience many different policymakers who focus on development-related issues. And at this conference, our whole motivation was to expose them to the ideas that diasporas can and should be used as a development tool for many developing countries. And she inspired many of our speakers there, and I know she will inspire you today. Please join me in welcoming Genevie Brown Metzger.
Thank you, Liesl, and thank you also to Professor Liesl, actually both of them, for organizing this invaluable conference and for all of the work that they're doing to support the diaspora movement, Jamaica's in particular. I want to start by saying that there is nothing worse than a lunchtime speaker. Or maybe there's one thing worse than a lunchtime speaker, and that's the lunchtime speaker who doesn't know that she or he has to quit before dessert. And somehow, if for one reason or another, the brazen speaker decides that he or she won't quit before lunch, we should at least hope that right before you will be something like creme brulee or rice pudding or some comfort food that keeps you in your seat. But ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure and a privilege and an honor for me to be here with you this afternoon. And as Liesl said, I'm Consul General, just now in office for, I guess, about 14 months. I'm a new hat at this business because, as you also heard, I have no foreign affairs experience. I come from the private sector. But my appointment really is an illustration of the importance that the diaspora means to our region, and particularly to our Prime Minister, in seeing that he wanted to choose somebody from the diaspora who knew the community that she or he was to represent, and who certainly could be able to represent that significance back to a government that is somewhat remote from those of us living here in the United States. Let's get on to the business as to why I'm here. Jamaica's diaspora numbers approximately 2.7 million, with the majority of persons residing in North America and the United Kingdom. And that represents as many Jamaicans outside of Jamaica as that live in the country. Jamaica's brain drain issue is brain gain to our host countries. A United Nations study recent study actually indicated that 60% of the highly educated Jamaicans live abroad. Jamaicans in the diaspora maintain strong and active ties to our homeland and families, returning home frequently, some maintaining second residences back home. First-generation Jamaicans maintain a cultural identity as Jamaicans. No matter how long we live here, we take out U.S. citizenship, we raise the red, white, and blue, we love America, but when you scratch us somewhere in the dark, wake us up in the middle of the night and ask us who we are, we always say we are Jamaican. Jamaicans in the diaspora represent 10% of the tourism market. Remittances to Jamaica are the largest earner of U.S. foreign currency, outstripping revenues from tourism and even major traditional exports such as bauxite. In fact, remittances outperform foreign direct investment capital. It is this abiding and unabated affinity for our country by its nationals that has inspired our diaspora movement. Initiated by the government in 2002, the Diaspora Movement held its first conference in 2004, the second in 2006, and the third in 2008. The event saw greater attendance in each year from Jamaican nationals who traveled from around the globe to participate. The thrust of our movement is simple: to maximize the participation of Jamaicans overseas who are desirous to contributing to the country's economic and social development. And we believe that it is not necessary to facilitate the return of Jamaicans to Jamaica to live to be able to achieve that objective. We, in fact, believe that Jamaicans should participate fully in the American life, become citizens, pay taxes, raise the red, white, and blue, and that, in fact, that would make them better able to engage and in civil society and to contribute to the development of our homes, of our homeland. Although not acknowledged in the United States, Jamaica allows for dual citizenship, and in fact, we encourage it. There's one notable exception, if you have been reading the Jamaican papers, which perhaps none of you have. Recently, a dual citizenship case came before our courts, and I'll share with you a little bit about it because it's quite interesting. It related to a member of parliament, an elected official, who held U.S. citizenship through his mother, which he has had since, of course, he was a child. The constitutional rule which precluded an individual with citizenship of another country from serving as an elected official was challenged for the first time. However, the rule was upheld after almost 2 years of a very heavy contest. This exception to the dual citizenship policy applies only, however, to persons who wish to serve in government as an elected official or an appointed officer. The Jamaican Diaspora Movement is officially sanctioned in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. In the US, it is divided into 3 regions: the Northeast, the Southern United States, and the Midwest, and it is represented by an organized group of diaspora boards in each region. Our priorities are health, education, crime and violence, trade and investment, and the role of church and faith-based organization in social development, as well as a focus on youth. The Department of Consular Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs interfaces with this network of boards and, in fact, creates the kind of dynamic that allows the kind of cross-cultural communication and development. The chairs of the diaspora boards operate as advisors to our government, interacting closely with and taking guidance from diplomatic missions such as the consulate and the embassy. There's also the Jamaican Diaspora Institute, based in Jamaica under the Diaspora Foundation. And that institute will be launching a most coveted and long-anticipated diaspora bond in 2010. Well, that's a quick kind of overview of the structure of our movement, and I like to refer to it as a movement because we actually get riled up as a people with slogans and ideas about how we are going to change policy and affect government change within our country. We have learned quite a bit along the way, and perhaps for me as Consul General, the most important thing is that we're not alone. And this group, this gathering, certainly has reminded me that with the kind of thinking and critical knowledge base that you have been able to pull together, this has served to really help create my own understanding about how to support the diaspora movement, certainly as I represent my country here. We've learned to reach out to other groups and communities and to share our experiences, and have learned a great deal in the process. We have honed our priorities, and we bicker a lot less about why we are so far behind in the development of our movement. We recently met with the Israelis, and when we heard a good half an hour about the push and pull between various community organizations, I could see our community leaders looking at each other and saying, thank God it's just not bickering Jamaicans doing this. We have had sessions with the Irish, with the Indians, and as I just told you, with the Israelis, and we have also picked the brains of the George Washington University officials such as Liesel and Chai recently, as we talked about and began to put together our database, which I'll talk a little bit about later. We have embraced the reality that the movement is a partnership between nationals and government, and that nationals can't do it alone. As a government, we have learned that we must give breathing room to the movement to define their terms and identify their goals and objectives, even as we endeavor to provide essential support. Where the CARICOM is concerned, Jamaica is the first country to officially launch a diaspora movement. The earnest and committed involvement in this exercise by the Jamaican government and the diaspora has inspired other CARICOM nations in initiating their own movement. Although not yet a reality for the CARICOM member nations, the diaspora movement phenomenon is, I believe, an important step for CARICOM nations in realizing the next horizon of opportunities under the Caribbean small market economy. I believe that the Caribbean nations' ability to compete in the global marketplace will be profoundly enhanced by the active engagement of their diaspora communities in the repatriation of resources, including skills and currency, and the ongoing formation and development of economic and trade initiatives and foreign direct investment into our native homelands. And I would personally like to see the issue of diaspora on the CARICOM agenda. In the last 14 months that I've been there, I've certainly been bucking for it, and I've gotten a little bit of resistance, but the good news came just about 6 weeks ago. I've been asked to make a presentation to the next session of the CARICOM. And so I'm here really to gather all the data and to take it back with me so that I can sound as if I know what I'm talking about. The extent to which the diaspora movement has been embraced by Jamaicans in the United States, I believe, speaks for overall for the kind of commitment that our people have to really making a difference in our society, not only in terms of supporting our families, but in the economic placement of the region in the global landscape. Years ago, before I was born, there was talk of the Federation in the 40s, in the late 30s and 40s. And now we have CARICOM as the answer to our regional integrity and regionalization. And little thought, if any then, was given to the fact that we had diasporans mostly in the United Kingdom and to a lesser extent in the United States. The focus was really on seeing how we can enliven and enrich that community. But 50 years later today, the onset of the new CARICOM passport, which Jamaica just got on stream in January of 2009, allows nationals and diasporans to live and work without a visa throughout the Caribbean. And I was talking to Mr. Jackson, a PhD student earlier, and I hope you know that. Are you aware of that? Yes. This is essential to our ability to compete in the global marketplace. My own personal experience as a Jamaican who immigrated to the United States 41 years ago makes an important point about the value of that Caribbean governments place on our diaspora. And I made the point that my being selected out of the diaspora to represent the government is a unique step. Never before has the government taken this decision. Typically, persons like myself would come out of a long history of foreign service and certainly would not be receiving a cold call from the Prime Minister, which was what happened to me, as strange as it sounds. He essentially did his homework, took a decision that he was going to select somebody from the community, did his homework, and placed a telephone call to my house, which I received while I was walking the dog about 2 years ago, and then the rest is history. A big risk, but I think a pretty smart one, because if I may say so, I think, as he explained, it makes little sense, if any at all, to place someone in the most important market in the diaspora, someone who has no connections, who is going to take at least 6 months to figure out the east side from the west side, who doesn't drive, who doesn't know how to navigate yellow cabs, although we have drivers these days, and who cannot bring some relationship, market relationships, trade relationships, political relationships, and capital to the job, such an important position as the Consul General in New York. We as immigrants, nothing here that you don't know, often live in two realities. It is a schizophrenic experience in a way. I prefer to call it a vibrancy of identity that fuels the diaspora engagement. And for the Jamaican Diaspora Movement, our biggest challenge at the moment is to how to really engage ourselves in a kind of focused way so that we're able to maximize and optimize the contributions that we want to give to our country. We are also challenged to see how we can engage our young people, particularly our post-first generation youth. I believe that the diaspora movement is not sustainable if focused only on first-generation Jamaicans. As immigration policy becomes more stringent, the numbers of first-generation Jamaicans will diminish, and the path to maintaining the meaningful and productive connections with homeland will narrow. Our diaspora movement is facing some defining issues. Diaspora boards are challenged to raise funds to establish secretariats and the necessary infrastructure to effectively run the movement. Diaspora operations are still to some degree an informal exercise. Further, boards have not yet determined the appropriate organizational structure under which to operate that accommodates fundraising, community representational and legislative activities, and political advocacy. There continues to be competition between diaspora organizations that predate the official movement, which I commonly refer to as small d diaspora, and the big D diaspora initiatives, those undertaken under the auspices of the official movement with the explicit sanction of the government of Jamaica. From the standpoint of my office, I have committed to developing the first global diaspora database. It will be the foundation upon which to build a robust communication platform on which to engage the diaspora on matters of trade and investment, tourism, and all issues deemed to be strategically important to national development. And I'm very pleased to say that we would not be able to have gone as far as we have without the support of this fine institution, and particularly Liesl and Chai. So thank you here again publicly if I have not thanked you enough already. We have recently launched, and Liesl doesn't know this, an interactive community organizational database and community activities calendar, launched as recently as the 15th, that was Monday. This is beginning already to prove itself an important way to connecting organizations across the New York tri-state area. Between Monday and today, and we made an announcement on the radio that this was going to happen, we received 192 telephone calls. 192 telephone calls in, today is what? Thursday? Friday? I must say that we don't get that many telephone calls when we have a hurricane. So this must be resonating with in a real way. There is a real need for an opportunity to effectively and sustainably communicate with each other within the diaspora community. One now that is really very difficult, at least until a couple of days ago. Phase 2 of the database will be a global data bank of individual diasporans. The platform will allow us to query diaspora interests in a variety of areas, such as trade and investment and tourism. The goal will be to set up a meaningful, efficient, and effective communication scheme where the government can be more responsive to diasporans' query and facilitate and maintain a close relationship with our people overseas. To bridge the seas that divide a people from its native homeland. To bridge the seas that divide a people from its native homeland. There's a certain emotional tone to that, because when I used that phrase a couple of months ago as I was talking about where we need to be in terms of our diaspora, somebody got up and said to me, bridging the sea. She related a story to me of some 50 years ago when she waved goodbye to her mother as she was going off at that time on a boat. And she went on, just from this simple remark, to tell me how she was disconnected from this woman for over 20 years, had not seen her, could not afford the fare to get back. Life in America had consumed her, and she had been out of her touch with her mother for over 20 years. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that diaspora for researchers is research. Diaspora for persons like us in diaspora is emotional. It is highly emotional. It is charged with a sentiment that no one can understand except those of us who are living it. And when we hear what we have heard today from Dr. Riddle about the goat, it's quite curious, because one might find it hard to imagine that there would be a business in such an experience, but there is. And for us, it is an opportunity to be able to make a contribution while we are living in the United States, build our lives here as Americans, and be able to repatriate some significant resources to our families who are, in the case of Jamaica, in very dire need. I conclude by making the point that the Jamaican Diaspora Movement is as much about Jamaica's future as it is about the future of diasporans themselves as we cultivate our lives in our adopted homes. And in this age of globalization, and even as migration trends indicate that 1 out of 10 persons living in a developed country today is a migrant, all of us are challenged as to how to live together in harmony, learn from each other, share our resources, and create a better world. That's the meaning of diaspora to me. Thank you for this opportunity to address you, and I look forward to taking your questions if you have any. Thanks.
The 192 phone calls you got within the week, is it from organizations, Jamaican organizations, or individuals?
It was mostly from organizations. Yeah, mostly from organizations who wanted to come online. You self-upload, and so they wanted to be able to, figure out how to upload the process. And we also had a feedback sheet, so they were providing the feedback. Wish they would have provided it online, but they chose to call instead.
We've seen, as I'm sure you're familiar with, a lot of data from the World Bank about the number of remittances around the world and how huge they are. Mm-hmm. I just want to know if you have any perspective as far as what they're used for abroad, whether it's just for the family, whether it's used actually for investments, what sort of activities are, and if you have any.
Yeah, I certainly do. With Jamaica, almost 100% of it is used to buy food and just basic living expenses, pay for school fees. Particularly there is, I think the statistics are about 15%, 12 to 15% pay for school fees for kids who would not otherwise be going to school. About 60% of it buys food, and the rest paying for housing. I think that is similar in other countries. So the good news with Jamaica is because the remittance goes so much to these basic, staple lifestyle needs, that it's reduced very, very minimally. And so what we're finding is that families are making the sacrifice here to send the money home to make sure that their families can at least still have food on the table. I did mention, right, that it is the largest earner of foreign exchange in the country, and that it essentially is a driver of the economy. Pretty significant. Yes, sir.
You've described that the Jamaican Diaspora community is very active here in the U.S., and I'm wondering if you can explain how they are involved with civil society here in the U.S. and how that compares with their involvement if they were back.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting question. In my opinion, I think they're more involved here. I don't know that Jamaica has the kind of opportunity for participation in civil society in the same way that it is here, which is very organized in the United States. We really understand how to start foundations and 501c3 organizations and so on. In Jamaica, you see that kind of activity mostly around churches, and they're really quite informal. I think also because we are a society that's a developing economy, that we tend to just naturally share our resources. We adopt other people's children or our cousins and so on. So that sort of thing happens. But in terms of an official social development networks that you're describing or alluding to, I find that that those are more an American phenomenon than they are a Jamaican phenomenon.
You made an interesting point about sustainability from first generation to second generation. Could you just at a high level talk about the drop-off you see between first and following generations, and maybe at a high level how you are going to address that challenge?
Right. Actually, the studies have not been done. What we have at the moment is anecdotal information. And in fact, Lisa and Chai, this might be an area to research. But what we're finding is that my children tend to be less inclined to want to return to Jamaica. They will go on holiday, but in terms of that emotional connection, it is not there. And so we have to make a commitment as first-generation Jamaicans to cultivate that in our children. And it really becomes important because when you look at the role of remittances in the economic life of our country, and as when you look at the fact that I'm aging and I will pass on, it really becomes important that our children develop and maintain that engagement so that we can have that sustainable kind of relationship. Now, in terms of how I want to handle that, that's the reason behind my focus on youth and future leadership, where the diaspora is concerned. Recently, we have begun to cultivate the Caribbean Students Associations throughout New York, and most of these kids are post-first generation children. They would be my daughters and sons. And it's very interesting what they are beginning to talk about they're very interested, once they're given an opportunity, to see how they may volunteer. So much of there are times when there might be opportunities for them to do coursework in another country. They would not otherwise know about that unless perhaps there's a reason they're told, or there's a reason to make that kind of connection. And so the consulate really can provide that opportunity for them and give them the reason to make that kind of connection. And I feel that what we're seeing is that once they have that opportunity, there's a real interest to see, well, how can we really become involved and how can we stay involved? And I think that was you after that.
Yes, I have another remittance question. I'm just wondering, is there a certain, any point at which the high amount of remittances to Jamaica becomes a double-edged sword? I mean, does it make the government maybe bother less with creating social programs on the one hand? On the other hand, I'm wondering if, as the crisis unfurls more in this country and people lose jobs, they may send back fewer remittances. That, of course, impacts Jamaica. So is it risky to depend so much on something as nebulous? I don't know if it's nebulous.
Well, I think it is risky. And of course, the criticism has been mounted, in political terms. It's one of the political footballs that's thrown around. You're not doing what you're supposed to do in terms of social programs. You're depending on my family to send money. I don't know that the government depends on this. I do feel that certainly where you have this significant, for Jamaica, for example, it's $2.2 billion. That's a sizable amount of money. I think the government in its own budget will incorporate that in the planning once it begins to distribute resources throughout the country. Necessarily, it's $2.2 billion. It's outstripping tourism, it's outstripping bauxite. So to think that it will not be kind of factoring that into its distribution of resources throughout the country, I think that would be naive. But I think it would be unfair to say that the government is essentially depending on it. I think the challenge for us is to take it from remittance to investment, and that's where we are right now. The first tier is, yes, the money's coming in, but how can we really use that in a more effective way to really make a difference throughout the economy, not only in the lives of persons, but in terms of building infrastructure and creating other kinds of opportunities for the country across the road. That's the challenge.
On that note, I personally know what you are talking about when you say it's emotional. I'm first generation immigrant. I know that. But on another hand, when you're talking about investment, it's financial, it's rational, right? So I wonder whether you have some insight on how businesswomen or businessmen can channel that emotion into making better investment decisions in their home country and Jamaica.
Yeah, Liesl touched on it a little bit today. I think we are less risk averse. I think that emotional connection makes us less risk averse. So we'll hang in there a little bit longer. I think that's an extremely important component when you begin to see or look at the value of foreign direct investment in our part of the world. Yeah, we need it, we want to attract it, but we live in a volatile part of the world. And if we're going to have investors who pull out at the drop of something that a diaspora would consider simple, then we're really putting that whole investment at risk. So I think that the fact that we are risk averse is born of our emotional connection to that country, and that should be developed and perhaps exploited, if you will. I think that the government should give us special incentives to be able to attract that investment and to stay with that investment when all else might have left. I know where Jamaica is concerned, we're beginning to look at those kinds of opportunities. And in fact, the diaspora, this is where the diaspora is quite interesting. It's demanding that we be given those kinds of incentives because of what the country means to us and because of that risk-averse characteristic. Yes?
Well, I'm interested to know, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years from now? Do you want to go back to Jamaica and continue whatever you're working on right now, but from that part of the world?
It's an interesting question because as of a year and a half ago, I was a U.S. citizen, so I had a choice. When I took this job, I had to give up my U.S. citizenship, so whether I want to or not, I've got to get the hell out of Dodge once it's over. But I think you're addressing that question to somebody who is a diasporan, who would have been here working for a while, and does he or she think about returning home? Last year, 2007, 2009, the consulate processed over 300 applications for returning residents. I just did the annual report, so I should know the exact number, but I know it's over 300. It's very interesting because I made just quick mention of it in my talk. The government is not saying you have to return home. The government is saying we understand realistically that you've made your life here, that the opportunities that are in America are far greater than you would have in Jamaica. Make your life here. Find a place, however, for Jamaica in your life. It is welcome, of course, and encouraging persons to come back home, teachers particularly, and those in the medical field, because that's where we have the greatest shortage. And so that's important. And of course, technology is another area where they're looking to repatriate persons. But in terms of the average diasporan, I think that the government is taking a very realistic view of this whole diaspora engagement. What does it mean? Does it say, that, am I going to drive a movement that requires persons to come back home, to give up their lives, and to move lock, stock, and barrel back home? Perhaps not. And I think that makes a lot of sense. For my experience, my family maintained a home there. We would go send our kids for summer holidays. When my parents retired, they bought a home and went back to retire well in their 70s. So many of us will do that. But they maintained a life here using the opportunities, the educational opportunities and the working opportunities, but kept that fire burning. And when the opportunity arose for them to be able to deepen or enlarge or increase their investment by way of real estate, they did that. But their lives were here. So I think you have to work both sides. You and then you.
I was wondering if you'd comment a little bit on the voice that the diaspora has in domestic politics in Jamaica, and what that role is for diasporans and diaspora in general.
Yeah. That discourse starts a lot with the right of diasporans to vote. Diasporans feel that they should have the right. Well, I should say, there's a significant number of people here who feel that they should have the right to vote in Jamaican elections. The Constitution does not allow for that. So to accommodate that, first of all, there needs to be a constitutional change. How likely that is, I'm not sure, but it is certainly a viewpoint that's held here by diasporans. So to that extent, there isn't the opportunity to participate, to exercise a voting franchise. But in terms of affecting policy, trade policy, tourism policy, we certainly have that. When you have 10% of the diaspora market, we haven't marketed to them, we haven't promoted, just people who get up and get on the plane and go to Jamaica, being an easy 10, 12% in any given year. You can see that there's a tremendous opportunity, if marketed, to increase that number. And so the government is beginning to do that. To that extent, the government is inviting, in the conversation on how to develop tourism, the diaspora viewpoint as to what is needed. What kind of hotels that you need? What are the resources that you need at the hotels? What's the hotel structure? And I think that's a good thing. And the same thing is beginning to happen in terms of trade and investment. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had any examples of successful diaspora investments or industries that the government has identified that they would like diaspora members to invest in.
Successful diasporan businesses in the United States.
No, successful ones in Jamaica. So have you seen investments already? Are they investing in hotels? Are they investing in restaurants?
Yes, the area of investment that, well, where we see diasporans participating in the largest number is in real estate. We're buying homes there. And in fact, there is a growing interest in developing two-family residences. It's interesting because what happens is that the part of, it's two-family residence, a part of the house would be rented out and would kind of pay for the carrying charges and the mortgage. And the other half would be there for when you return home with your family to live. So it would be paying for itself, so to speak. And we see more of our people getting involved in larger real estate schemes where we're putting up gated communities. Architects, I know for one, when I ran a business, I facilitated the development of a gated community, pretty significant gated community in the Ocho-Rios area of Jamaica. So it's pretty much in the real estate market. I would like to see greater movement in the area of entrepreneurship, mentorship, where we who have business experience go back to Jamaica and mentor young people who are interested in opening businesses, because it makes sense, because we have a high unemployment there. And the fact of the matter is that those young persons coming out of college are going to have to create their own employment. And so there's a real need for that. And so once that happens, and there is a preliminary discussion about how we can get that going now, which is actually initiated when I was here last year. Liesl introduced me to somebody at AID. I think that could have some very exciting opportunities looking into the future. Yes, Lisa.
You talked a little bit about the organization of the Jamaican Diaspora Movement. Can you talk a little bit about its history? Like, how did it form? As well as, what is its relationship to the Jamaican government?
Well, in 2004, Charlie Rangel and a few other key Caribbean leaders hit up the White House and said, you know, we think that you're not doing enough in the Caribbean region. We don't see the kinds of support in terms of trade policy. One thing led to another, and coming out of that meeting was the support for this diaspora movement that was, interestingly enough, started with some significant support by the United States government. I found that quite interesting. And then Charlie Rangel, with these community leaders in 2004, formed what was essentially going to be Caribbean Week. And then out of that, CARICOM nations got together, and Jamaica took hold of this concept of putting in place a formal diaspora movement. So by 2006, we had the first diaspora conference, which was held in Kingston. It happens every 2 years, so the last one was 2008. The relationship between the diaspora movement and the government is one that's what I like to describe as a tormentous parental teenage relationship. The diaspora being the teenager and the government being the parent. The diaspora knows everything and the government knows nothing. I really want the government, but I don't really want the government. I need the government, but I really don't need the government. You know, don't tell me what to do. Let me find my way. So it's really quite interesting. But I think we're at a point now where we understand that we're inextricably tied together. That, and the challenge, as I mentioned briefly, is for the government to be able to give room to the diaspora to say, develop your priorities, let me hear from you, as opposed to telling you the format and the structure in which you will work. So I'm beginning to see some settling out of that rancorous relationship at the moment, and such things as the diaspora bond is an indication that we're settling down, we're really getting to business, and that our growing pains are somewhat behind us. Yes, sir.
Have you adopted any of the Asian microfinance model and taken it in Jamaica?
Mm-hmm. I don't know that we have. I know that over the years, Singapore has been a role model for us. We, in Prime Minister's speeches and the Minister of Foreign Trade and Finance, we always seem to point to Singapore, and there are historical reasons, similar size, similar historical background, and so on. But I don't know that we have per se adopted the Asian model. No.
I'm talking about Asia, I mean Bangladesh, India, that part of Asia, the microloan, microfinance type.
Oh, I see. Oh, I see. Are we participating in? Yeah, there is.
A UNIS type, you know, or the
right. Yeah. There is some of that. I'm not sure how much of it, but there are some of those loans that are facilitated in Jamaica at the moment. I don't have the statistics as to how many. Anybody else? Well, thank you all very much. Enjoy your dessert.